The reason so few go on a journey of self discovery is defining and being your most authentic self also requires embracing vulnerability. And at some point, you have to explain or maybe even defend how you're showing up. And that is, of course, assuming that you go through these changes and then you actually take some actions and you have a different way of being or speaking. Now, on the Sovereign Man podcast I told you about earlier, the conversation morphed into a discussion about vulnerability and authenticity, which was actually born from some of the realities that have merged post pandemic. And given some of the challenges that men are facing today. Now, I think you'd likely agree business in 2023 has been pretty challenging for many. And it's not just business, it actually applies to family and relationships and perhaps even the confusion and the uncertainty that men face. And I want to qualify that men and women. I was on the Sovereign Man podcast. That's why I refer to men. But in my conversation with Nikki, who was the show's host, I actually shared the need for what I believe is that men have to be prepared and actually have the courage to be more vulnerable with where they're at mentally, for example, and then to tell the truth about what is really going on for them. And that led to a discussion about the risks of men or women being authentic, which then led to getting into the clarifying context, if you will, which is that men and women, whether they're separate or together, actually need to create the environment and the space to get together with other like minded people and to engage and have levels of conversation that go deeper than just asking, how's the weather? Or how about that sports team, whichever one you happen to watch. Now, from my perspective, I'd say that right now, in what seems to be an increasingly divisive and polarized world, the toughest question to answer eventually gravitates to wondering if anyone can or even should risk being vulnerable, or should they be sharing their views or fears, their concerns, without risking being made wrong or ostracized, even perhaps even trolled on social media. Now, I'm going to say that the short answer to that is yes, they can risk it. But the longer answer is it's not as easy as we sometimes may think it is. Now, I'm going to give you a bit of an example. I got together, a friend phoned me, said, "Hey, Patrick, let's get together for a drink and a burger." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." So we got together, and as we were sitting there talking, he actually shared with me some of what he was feeling was a challenge. Now, he's been on a very clear personal growth journey, if you will. He's very accomplished in his career, two young teenage children, very successful in his business, an amazing wife. But he's been on this journey of self discovery, of really kind of committing to being the best he can be. And he is at so many levels. But as he's going through that and that self discovery, he's learning things and he's wanting to share with others. But as he's sharing with others, they're kind of looking at him like, well, you part of a cult or something? Like what, like they don't really get it. So he can't open up to the conversation. Now, the point of me sharing the story is that you can risk being vulnerable, but you have to actually work to create the right environment. And I would say that it's one of the driving forces behind this particular Mindset Matters podcast and working to grow this YouTube channel, because it really is about attracting like-minded individuals and getting into conversation, even if it is just comments in the show notes. So one of the things is that authenticity requires really embracing vulnerability. And that's because it allows us to let go of the mask and, again, those front facing facades. So when we open up ourselves to that vulnerability, we actually are creating the space for further, more real and genuine or even meaningful connections with others, because like attracts like. And when we create that space, we actually go on the journey together and have that collective personal growth, if you will. But having said that, we have to walk before we run. And most importantly, we have to know that not everyone is on the journey of being their best selves and of living their greatest lives. As a matter of fact, most by far would argue for the stand they take, which is, this is just the way I am, rather than considering that the way we are is always a decision. We actually are choosing who we are being and how we are showing up. Now, let me share another story, a little bit of a personal anecdote with you. For many years in my life, some would consider me to be curt and abrupt. And okay, actually, some still do. But I really didn't understand what even any of that meant. And then one day at a particular event that I was speaking at, a one of the attendees, who happened to be actually somebody I knew, approached me as I was walking through the foyer of this big building, and he said, Patrick, I just have to share something with you. I've known you a while, and I just want to say that I don't know what it is, but you intimidate the shit out of me. And I went, wow. He says, yeah, you always got this serious look on your face, and I don't know what it is. So rather than take that as being critical, I took it as good feedback, and I considered it. And I went, something, I know that when I'm thinking a lot, when I'm walking and thinking, I've got this stern look on my face, and I'm just really focused, and I'm probably not that pleasant or really appealing as somebody to approach. And what I did immediately is I gave it some thought. And then when I went back into the room, which was several hundred people that I knew that I would meet through the course of the weekend that I was speaking at, I took off my suit jacket. I actually loosened my tie, and I rolled up my sleeves. And it was just the thought that I had, that how do I open up to people? And that changed the whole weekend. Just relaxing into that casualness rather than being in the dark suit and the tie and being all buttoned down changed the game. And it really changed how I showed up on stage for years afterwards. Now, the point is it was really profound in that the friend did just a great job of sharing how I was occurring for him, even though he knew me well. So I actually had to consider that input from him, and I just made some changes. Now, I was very conscious of it, and I just started thinking about just how I showed up in appearance, not just how I showed up in appearance, but also of how I was entering the conversation with people, and being clear that if I'm being present, not in my head, not being present to this conversation, I had to consider is, am I entering the conversation where I'm at or where they're at? And what I got to is staying present and entering the conversation where people I was talking to are at, not where I was at. Okay, now that may be a little bit confusing, but let's face it. The journey of self discovery is not without its challenges. There are fears, there are doubts, there's definitely resistance that's going to show up along the way. And as you start to step into being your truest self, you just may no longer align with the way of thinking of your friends, of your family, of your peers. And so we need to align with their values, but we may not anymore. That has gone, and you're really clear on who you are. And all of a sudden, you don't align with those values, and that may mean a change in the relationship, which then frightens people off, and then begs the question, are you willing to be misunderstood in the context of your life, in the context of your self-discovery? And in all honesty, I got to say that many, perhaps even most, are not. Those are big decisions, and when we get to be who we really are, then all of a sudden the people that we were hanging out with before may not be the people that you want to continue hanging out with. That is both the blessing and the curse, by the way, of self discovery, of being authentic.